I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself when you answer it. How many times this week have you said yes when everything inside you was screaming no? How many times have you bitten your tongue in a meeting, taken on more than you can carry, smiled and said, I'm fine, when you absolutely were not fine? You learned that that's what a good girl does. Because here is what I know to be true. The conditioning we receive as little girls, be nice, don't rock the boat, be grateful, be accommodating, that doesn't just disappear when we grow up. It follows us into our workplaces, into our relationships, into the moment we return from parental leave and think, I should just be grateful to have my job back. And if you're a working mum, I have to tell you that good girl conditioning, it is costing you. It is costing you your voice, your boundaries, your sense of self, and your career. Welcome to the Working Mama podcast. If you're new here, welcome. You belong here. And if you've listened before, welcome back. I'm so grateful you're here. Because working motherhood isn't just about doing everything perfectly. It's about finding a new way that works for you. Today's guest has written a book on the good girl theory. Yes, literally. Caitlin Judd is a business consultant, coach, podcast host, and now author of Good Girl, a deeply honest and genuinely eye-opening book about the scripts we inherit as women and what it costs us when we keep playing them. She has spent years working with high-achieving women, women who look like they have it all together on the outside, and helping them untangle from the patterns that are quietly holding them back. Caitlin has built a career on her own terms, taken more than a few micro rebellions along the way, and she is one of the most thoughtful voices in this. Let's get into it. Welcome, Caitlin, to the Working Mama podcast. How's your day going so far?
Good, really good. I'm so excited to be here. So thank you for having me.
No, my pleasure and certainly my honor. I'm really looking forward to chatting all things good girl and probably the mindset that we give ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves today. But before we get into it, Caitlin, you're a business consultant, coach, podcast host, and just all-round business entrepreneur and now author. I want to ask you the question I think that every woman secretly wants to ask you. Were you a good girl growing up?
Look, if you do finish the book, there's definitely no secret there. I do reveal that, yes, I was a good girl growing up. I was the classic good girl. I think, so many of us hear those words, being spoken to us, good girl, and it can seem so innocent, right? And yeah, but in fact, it can often have the opposite effect. And, I was well behaved. I was the responsible one. I was high achieving, and I had brothers. So as you can imagine, the good girl is often very relational in relation to others. And, I was the good kid. Like my brothers were the naughty ones. So it was like, oh, I need to even be even extra good. And I know that that's a few people's experience. So yeah, it was definitely praised. But, over time, that identity can become quite difficult and hard, and it kind of becomes a face that we put on. And this idea of putting people first and being accommodating and being caring and kind, well, obviously all of those are really good attributes, and not something that we need to just completely remove. But when it's just one way and you're constantly putting other people first, and you're not necessarily putting yourself first and ignoring your own needs, that's where, this kind of good girl conditioning really does start to affect and cost us in lots of different ways. So, it's multifaceted. My good girl looks different depending on the situation that I'm in and the people that I'm with. But yeah, I think writing this book was definitely about uncovering my good girl, and it's all in there. I put it on the page, so you can have a read. But yes, I was a good girl. And, I think I kind of just alluded there, it does look different. It's not always the one thing. And I would say you're probably not so much a good girl, for example, in my career. I've taken a lot of chances, and I've kind of bucked that kind of traditional climbing the corporate ladder, model of doing work. But then, in other areas, perhaps, romantic relationships or in relation to other people that, wanted different things out of life. And I realized, I was going along with that and not necessarily honoring what I wanted. So, it really does flex, and it's very nuanced. And yes, I explore all of those good things in the book.
Yeah. And so when did you first come across, I guess, this concept in your own examples and situations of going, oh my goodness, I'm doing what other people expect me to do, as what you said, as opposed to actually following the path that you truly wanted?
I think, what I recognized was that I was saying yes instead of saying no. I was biting my tongue when I should have spoken up. I didn't set boundaries that would protect my peace and my own well-being. I even signed clauses to protect other people. I think there are so many little moments that I can look back on and recognize that, okay, yeah, in that moment, I didn't fully choose myself. And my big one was, one of my biggest, I call them power holes, where, they're kind of like the stronghold that the good girl has on her everyday behavior. Mine was like self-silencing. I was self-silencing and tolerating poor behavior. And we are often conditioned to do that, because that's we grow up being flexible and accommodating and making sure that everyone else feels okay and not rocking the boat. We're told not to rock the boat, not upset other people. And we're often reprimanded, if we do upset someone. But often that's just trying to set a boundary. But when we're kids, we don't really have the language or the tools to be able to go, I need space, or I don't want to play with you right now, or, I want to go do something else. And so, the information or the feedback that we're given reinforces this idea that, we don't have agency over ourselves and our space and our control and our bodies. And so, when we push back, we often do get in trouble. And so, these then start to carry through, adulthood. Now, obviously not at the same degree, but they're still very much there, and they can carry through in work, through family, whole host of different places. So I started seeing those little moments in myself. I also started seeing these moments, and I call them scripts. These are scripts that we inherit from a young age, that, be nice, that, don't rock the boat, the, do as you're told. I started seeing it in myself, but I also started seeing it in a lot of my clients. And, these are really successful, high functioning women. And where it was showing up was often in like confidence, making themselves smaller, not feeling like they could speak up, whether it was in a meeting or going after the client that they really wanted to, or an opportunity. And so they were kind of, again, they were self-silencing in a way, making themselves smaller. I started noticing it there. Imposter syndrome was another big one. And so all of these scripts were carrying through in adulthood, were showing up in how women approach their work and their work and how they operate in a workplace. And I just started to see the patterns, and I was like, oh my goodness, this isn't an individual flaw. This isn't just me. It's all of us. And it isn't, again, it's not something that there's no problem with any of us. It's the fact that society has told us that we need to behave a certain way and expect us to behave certain ways. And that script is often assigned from birth, you know, and then as I said, as we grow up, we hold on to those scripts because they're designed to keep us safe, to keep us, in relation to others, to be loved, to be understood, to be celebrated when we achieve, get the A's and the gold stars. So this conditioning can be so sticky and so strong. As I said, I noticed that so many, different kind of points throughout my life. And then there was a moment, a few years ago where I was like, enough's enough. Enough's enough. And, I labeled it with good girl, and it kind of just all dawned on me and hit me and was like, yeah, this is what it is. And that's when I started to research, and I was like, oh, wow, yeah, this is here. This has been written about before, but not in a way that really honors the societal implications, the societal pressures to be the good girl. It was often like, oh, very trauma related, which it is, and we can go into soon, but it was more about the individual rather than how's the system actually contributing to this good girl conditioning.
Yeah, and I think so much of what you've just said around unable to set boundaries or not really holding the boundaries, the imposter syndrome, the stories and things like that, these are topics that come up time and time again, not only on this podcast, but also I reckon every single day, women and also for mothers, just as you're saying that around, and there seems to be this conversation at the moment as well, a lot in society around the traditional role of women, what should they be doing, and then versus what they're doing. And essentially as women, we're trying to unpack hundreds of years of what, you know, the patriarchy, and we're really trying to undo that in a relatively short period of time. If you think about it, 50 years ago, women needed a male to actually help them open up a bank account. And we're trying to unpack all that in a relatively short space of time, but also go, no, we want to shake up the standards and expectations and stop always being that good girl. And it's amazing the nature versus nurture debate with young children, boys versus girls. And I've seen it play out in my friendship groups of girls sitting down drawing and aren't they good girls? But then the boys are being rough and tumble. They're seen as bad, but that's just the way that boys are.
Absolutely. And then when, you know, the girls do decide to rebel or, you know, choose a different path and agitate or, you know, not play the part of the good girl, they are often labeled bad.
Yeah.
You know, they're the bad girl. And I often think, you know, I look back now and I'm sure there was the rebel at school when you know, when you were in high school, but was she really all that bad? Or was she just, you know, pushing the boundaries and kind of maybe she actually saw what was happening a lot earlier than many of us do. And, you know, those expectations that were placed upon her and she just wanted to push beyond that and push and see where she could get to. And society deemed her to be rude and to be, you know, unhelpful and to be, the bad girl. And so I find that really, really interesting. And, you know, it's made me reconsider, well, of course we're going to be labeled those names when society deems that as improper. And it can be a bit of it can be difficult to navigate, not only as a young girl or a girl becoming a woman, but also as a mother. You know, it's like, how do I navigate that? And how do I let that person, that girl, go on that journey of discovering herself and making those mistakes and not standing in her way and telling her to be a good girl? You know, it's obviously it's a challenge.
Is it a real conscious, and has it also been for you, a real conscious decision of going, nah, I'm not going to actually just keep saying yes, and almost putting everyone in front of yourself? Because it is okay to actually do something for yourself. And I know as a mum, you're often thinking, okay, what do my kids need? And then I'll be like three, you know, well down the list of what actually needs to be done. But what is it actually like almost having that circuit break to go, no, I'm not going to always be the good girl. And it's okay to actually say no and rewrite your story.
Yeah, it's a struggle, right? It is a struggle to disrupt those patterns because they are doing what they're supposed to do. You know, they're there keeping you safe, and society benefits from that greatly. Society benefits from you being the good girl and staying quiet and playing the role and, you know, over giving and over delivering and, you know, the mental load and, you know, all of those kind of things. So it can be really difficult to disrupt. But I think that level of awareness at the start, like what are those scripts that I inherited that were given to me by my family or school or, you know, the different kind of environments that I grew up in? What were some of my scripts? And recognizing those, I think, is really, really important first step in being able to kind of untangle from your good girl. And once you've kind of explored that, you can start to see, okay, like I carry that script, you know, I put other people first and, you know, it's not okay to speak up or speak out or to challenge authority. You know, once you start to see your scripts, you can start to challenge those and go, okay, is that helpful? Is that actually helping me right now? Is it helping me in this moment? And what would it look like if I challenge that? What would it look like if I took a different path? And I talk about kind of experimenting in the book. There's a whole chapter towards the end around micro rebellions. And it's little rebellions that still, I suppose, you know, are safe enough that they're not going to get you into trouble. But it's a way to push back, you know, and you can push back in terms of a micro rebellion might be just, you know, for yourself setting a boundary, might be setting a boundary that you perhaps haven't already set, right? Then there's the kind of relational reset or the relational micro rebellion. And I read a story the other day. This woman had written, I think must have been on LinkedIn. She wrote this post about how every Friday comes around and her husband always asks, what are we doing this weekend? And she's just like, hang on a minute. Why is it always up to me? Why is it my responsibility to be the one to know what's happening this weekend for myself, for him, and for the children?
Yeah.
And so, the micro rebellion there was, okay, in relation to my husband and my partner, whoever that might be, I'm going to change this because it doesn't work for me anymore. It's not fair that I have to carry this mental load. So she decided, even though, again, I understand that, there's still a bit of laboring here, but it is a shift, and we're talking about small shifts here. So what she does is now on a Friday in the morning, she sends an email. Takes her 10 minutes, but it kind of pulls all of the things that are going on and it sorts it and it like assigns it to both of them. Now that 10 minutes, she's like, that is actually now such a better use of my time than having to carry the whole mental load of all the weekend activities and plans for the whole family. She's like, yes, I am still responsible for it, but it is a step in the right direction. So that's a micro rebellion, in effect, between her and her partner, that household. And then you can micro rebel on a societal and a systemic level, right? And that could look like going into work and challenging some of the policies that, are there to, I suppose, protect or, support working women. Okay, well, like go in there and challenge that. Maybe it's, spending your money with female-founded organizations and companies and businesses, because that's where, you want to see that flow through of money into the hands of more women. You can kind of use this micro rebellion framework in so many different ways. And the whole idea, though, is that it starts small and you can agitate change in small ways. And I think that's what's really powerful, is that we all do have the power to start making those shifts. It isn't easy, as I said, because it's so ingrained. But once you recognize it, you have the capacity to change it.
And I think it's also really important, and it gives you confidence by starting small. So if you're able to make those small changes, because confidence is a bit like a muscle. So the more you start making those micro changes and you're pushing back, you're going, okay, right, I've done it once. It's probably the first time is actually going to be no doubt the hardest. But the more that you do it, the more you're going, oh, okay, I've got a little bit more confident. Maybe I could do something a little bit bigger and a little bit more. Start to be able to push those boundaries, push back a little bit more, because you're slowly over time as well building up your confidence, rather than starting something really big of, right, okay, we're going to challenge the policy, but it might be
correct
as so much as what you said at home, the mental load. Saying that, I'm thinking my kids at the moment, even though I've said to them 5 times today, yep, you've got swimming and this is the plan for the week. They're like, what are we doing today? I'm like, I have told you, even my husband. And I'm like, we've got a shared calendar. It's all there.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think, I was on a call a few weeks ago with a group of women, and one of them said, my goodness, like I went to see my doctor. I kind of hit a breaking point. And she walked into the doctor's office and she's just like, oh my God, I want to burn my life down. And the doctor said, you'd be surprised how many women come in and kind of say something similar. Yeah. And that is where people are hitting this, level of burnout, a level of exhaustion, a level of just like, I've had enough. Like, this is not working. The status quo no longer works for me. And now I want to do a 180 on my life. The thing with that is that is really disruptive, right? That is probably not the way that I would suggest to go. I think what that, the person that was telling the story had done beautifully was go and seek support. And I talk about that in the book a lot, having a scaffolding of support. But I think, what I kind of mentioned earlier and what, you just said is it starts small. It is those small things. And so once you get to this, you kind of almost wake up at this breaking point. A lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us get to a point where you can no longer do what you've been doing, right? And that can look like it could be work, it could be personal life, but we do often hit a place that is like a slap in the face or a punch in the gut. And it's like, you cannot keep functioning this way anymore. Like, this is a serious cost to your health. And I wish that we didn't have to reach that point, but that is often the point where we wake up. But then it becomes those small incremental changes. And that is the power. And, I know it won't look like much in that moment. It won't feel like a lot in that moment. But as you said, it builds the confidence to be able to keep going. And even if you do fail, it's typically not catastrophic. And I say in the book, the people that benefit most from you being a good girl are the ones that don't want you to change. They want you to stay that way because they benefit greatly from you playing that role. And you have to ask yourself, are they the people that deserve to be in your life? Because if they are stopping you from changing to be healthier and more present and to really identify with yourself and have that experience of living life as it's happening, not as you think it should be happening, do they really deserve a front row seat? And, you do have to question that. And it does end up changing relationships. It does end up changing perhaps where you work or who you work for, the clients that you have. It does end up changing, your habits, the way that you look after your health. And and I think we should always be looking at these things and querying and questioning and challenging them. So I think, yes, it's the small things that add up, but it does build that confidence muscle, as you said. And that's so important because you want this to be easier. It's not always going to be comfortable, but it doesn't have to hurt. And I think there's a difference between those two things.
Yeah. And there's so much of it as well that we go, I know as mums, like I often say should be a swear word because that's probably then the good girl conditioning actually coming out. I should be doing this. Well, why? It's because the stories and the systems of what we should be doing. But in fact, is it really what you want to be doing? And it really, as you say, it's uncomfortable, but working out and having that reflection and realization of going, well, is this what I really want? And I know during such a big phase, such as becoming a mum, you've got this whole new identity. You've been through matrescence. You're going, well, what is it? There's so much like on Instagram these days of the perfect Instagram lunches and things. You're like, well, you don't need to do that. It's crazy. Like that is good girl conditioning 101.
Absolutely. It is reinforced. And I talk about that in the book. The conditioning stems from the family, from schooling, and then it's reinforced through the workplace, through media, through marketing. Social media is absolutely like a hive for this stuff. Like, it is. It's social comparison. And I think with motherhood particularly, it's like, well, yeah, who's the better mom? Who's doing the better job? Who's making the perfect lunches? And I just think that often the ones that are putting that out there, that, that motherhood and this journey looks perfect and I'm doing it so well, they're often getting paid. There's a lot of, mother influencers out there, right? And you look at that and go, okay, like you've got to take it with a grain of salt. You really do. And I think that we do have that level of awareness now. However, you can still fall into that trap. It's so easy to fall into that trap because it's constantly being reinforced, not only through social media, but then, you turn on the TV, advertising. I was looking at a campaign. There were 2 campaigns that popped up this week. I won't name them because, I do like these brands, but one, it was a clothing company, a clothing online retailer, and I can't remember the other one, but the campaigns were effectively, and it's leading up to Mother's Day, right? And it was the working mother trope. But the working mother trope was the mother with the kid, on her hip with like stuff everywhere, but she also looked really glam. And I was like,
that is not reality.
Wait a minute. How is that reality? Like, how is that reality? And, she's like, and so like they're kind of saying, oh, like it's not glamorous. There's going to be shit everywhere, but you can still look good. And yes, like it's not to say that we can't do those things, but that isn't everyone's experience.
No.
And it's very rarely everyone's experience.
Usually if you're looking like if there was an article with like your hair everywhere, a big hot mess, that would be the target.
Totally. And I'm just like, I'm looking at these campaigns and I'm like, still, they think they're getting closer to accepting motherhood in its entirety, but they're actually still missing the point. And it really frustrated me. It really frustrated me. These are big brands that everybody knows about, and they're getting the message wrong. But no one's questioned that. No one's pulled that up. And, I think it's harmful. I think it's really, really harmful because, as I said, the system isn't designed to support working mothers. It's not. We have a long way to go. And so for then, I think brands, they have a responsibility. And I really believe that they shouldn't be contributing to this narrative that like, yeah, you can have it all, but not quite, but almost.
Yeah.
And, you can look good. I mean, it's just, come on. Like,
it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Absolutely crazy.
It's crazy.
I received an email about a women's leadership conference. And so I went in, had a look at all the speakers and what they're all going to be talking about. And there is nothing here that actually shows the reality of being a female leader, giving 86% of women will actually have children. And then I called it out on LinkedIn and I said, why aren't conferences talking about the realities of being a working parent for both male and female? I've even seen it in HR conferences. There is nothing about it. And so it just makes you believe that to be a female leader, you don't talk about what it's like to be a mum and go up against at times some really significant barriers and a system that isn't necessarily designed to support you either. And you're going, why don't we talk about this enough? We need to start calling it out. Stop being, yes, this is what a leadership is, and it doesn't involve, as you're saying, you need to bring your whole true self to all parts of your life, not just a little skerrick of what people think it might be.
That was your micro rebellion. That was
my micro rebellion.
Calling it out, right? And I'm so I'm proud of you and I'm glad you did that because it's not easy. And, we often shy away from speaking the truth because we know that, these are polarizing opinions and someone's going to come, someone can come at you. But I think that it's really important to start having these conversations and start the shift. And particularly when an organization has is organizing something like that, there is a responsibility to represent everybody. There is. And I've done a similar thing, called people out on, panels that lack diversity. And I'm just like, what's this about? And I think more of us should. So yeah, well done on doing that. It's not easy. And, I think that, as I said, that there needs to be an accountability and representation of what it looks like. And I think what's also important to note here is that, yeah, it also doesn't serve men. This isn't just a women's thing, right? The current structures, the current working structure is difficult for parents, full stop. And that shift when, you go back to work, especially after you've taken time off, can be jarring because, not only has your identity changed, you have a whole new set of responsibilities. It's you're trying to figure out how to juggle your life and you've got somebody who relies on you now. So you're there, you're responsible for the well-being of this person, this baby who needs you, and then you're trying to step into a system that still doesn't really know how to navigate that. And so many women are being sidelined in that process, and it's often silenced again because it can be so muddy and murky and hard to navigate that space, especially returning to work from, taking time off to take care of your child. That can be really difficult. And if you don't have the resources and you don't have the support to, challenge that and to stand up for yourself and to, rearrange the system to support you, so many mothers struggle in that and fathers struggle in coming back and having to step back into that role because, as I said, the system hasn't shifted to support that change, that not only that change in identity, but the change in how, you know, you now need to work in order to accommodate so many more new things into your world and your life. And yeah, that's what we're seeing it. It is changing. I think, there's a lot of conversations and, I think the right step is to call things out when things need to be called out. But yeah, we can't, ignore the challenges of that and struggles.
What if someone thought, all right, I'm just one little person. What change am I actually going to make, say, of returning back into work and challenging the status quo and actually saying, well, maybe I want to work part-time and negotiate and things like that maybe they've been told, right, you've got to come back full-time. You're like, well, no, I don't want to. And that doesn't sit well for me. We could always be the good girl of actually, this is what I'm going to accept, because the good girl would be that they go back 5 days and say, yes, sir, 3 bags full, sir. I'm very grateful for my job back. As opposed to saying, well, I would like to work 4 days in a hybrid situation and actually have support and to be able to see my child.
Yes. Gosh, wouldn't that be nice if we just submitted the request and
then it all gets accepted?
Yeah. You send off one email and they're like, oh my goodness, of course. Wouldn't that be lovely? I think, when there is a big change that occurs in your life, or to be honest, I mean, I like to kind of do this, regularly. It's a stock take. It's looking at your life and going, what does it represent right now? What are my values? Am I in alignment? Am I living the life that I am creating? And there's this really kind of simple framework in my book where, you need to start with self-respect, right? It's respecting yourself and putting yourself first in this moment. Then there's the kind of self-coaching. So that coaching piece, it's starting to ask yourself those questions, right? Every answer is preceded by a good question. You need to start asking yourself really thoughtful, considered questions. And then there's the self-leadership, and it's leading yourself through that change. Now, as I said, when we are navigating change, we often need the belief that it's possible, but we also do need support and resources to be able to do this. So I understand that there will be some women that will have to go back into a role that might not suit them because that is their only option. However, I am of the belief that, we can create our future, our ideal future, and it might not happen overnight, but it can happen. We have that agency, we have that control, we have these opportunities out there for us. So if you're going through this period of change, becoming a mother, I think it's the time where you do need to, even though I'm sure there's a lot going on, but it's time to kind of step back and go, does this still work for me? Is this role that I had before I became a mum now suited to my world and my needs post baby? Is this something that I can step back into 5 days a week and, not see my child and put, and you really do have to, you've got to ask yourself the hard questions. And I think it's okay in that moment if the answer is no. And I've always said, and I truly do believe that, the workplace doesn't owe you anything, right? You are effectively a number and, you are disposable. And I think we kind of were told that be grateful, as you said, I'm grateful, thank you for this job. And it's like, no, well, you're getting paid to do something. And I think it's really important that what you do and how you show up does work around the life that you need to create. And it's also why so many women are exiting this, traditional model of work and going out on their own or starting that side hustle or fractional work and building a portfolio of different opportunities to fit around their lifestyle. So you do need to question and ask yourself, is this working for me right now? And not, is this working for me, yesterday or the day before when maybe my situation and my circumstance was different, but is this working for me today? Is this working for me right now? And they're big questions. And, as I said, it's not something that you can change overnight, but if it is that 5 days no longer works, I had a client who went in and negotiated down to 4 in order to be able to accommodate that 5th day to build her own consultancy, which she then eventually went full-time into. And so, of course, it wasn't like the next day she just waltzed in and said, hey, I need to go down to 4 days. But there was a plan there, and that was building like thought leadership in this space and being able to show that there was a pathway for her, and then perhaps how that then would contribute and, provide value to that organization. Now, it doesn't always have to be that way, but I think that, we are smart enough to figure out how things can work. And there are now so many opportunities out there to facilitate our needs. There are job boards that are simply for fractional work or for part-time roles. There are, you couldn't have conceived of this even 5 years ago. And so there are so many more opportunities. And I really think that it's our responsibility to say, this doesn't no longer work for me. Try to remedy that perhaps in your current workplace and, speak to your manager and try and figure out how it can work first. But if there's really like that resistance that keeps coming up and things aren't going to change, and you can see the writing on the wall, or you just know that this is not the season that I'm in for this right now, again, it comes back to self-respect, self-coaching, and self-leadership. You have to be the one to make that call and to change it. And no one else can do that for you.
And no one else is probably going to come to that reality. No, you're not going to get this knock on the door. Hey, this isn't working for you. There's no little fairy that's actually going to do that. And it might be quite difficult for you to actually go through that process. But as you said earlier, you're actually going to no doubt live a more wholesome life if you're doing that. And if you're already there, congratulations. But also at times, if you feel like things are a bit sticky, the system's not there, you not feel like you're really living your true life, sometimes it's also not necessarily, as you say, about what you're doing today, but at least having that plan, as what you said, that lady that went down to 4 days, there was a plan. So it also gives you the confidence and the assurance, okay, what I'm working on now is not always going to be forever. But even in those workplaces, there are so many times as well that we have that good girl conditioning of what we should be. We should be grateful. We should be, we're okay, and you've got a job. So you're doing really well. You've got a job. But
yeah. Because it often feels like, remember, we grow up thinking that there's limited opportunity and that we're in competition with others for those opportunities. And so it makes sense that once you are in a position or a role that it feels greater than what it is, if that makes sense, that, my goodness, I stand to lose so much if I step away. However, there's also so much to gain. And because we can't see what that looks like, we underestimate the impact that the future will have on you. So it is that dreaming piece. You've really got to step back and go, what do I want my legacy to be? What do I want my future to look like? I have this beautiful exercise that, is popular. I recorded an audio of it because I just love it so much. It's the 90th birthday. When I look forward and it's my 90th birthday and I'm surrounded by the people that I love and, they're celebrating me, they're talking about me. What is it that they're saying? What have I done? What's the legacy that I'm, the impact that I'm having or that I've had throughout my career and my life? And I think it's those questions, while they do seem scary at times, they're the ones that will steer you back on track when you fall off. And that's what I come back to. Of course you can't, answer these big questions, every day. Like we've all got, things to just do, and the to-do list is always to-doing. But I do believe that, when you feel like you kind of wandered off track and you're just like, hang on a minute, is this it? Is this the role for me? Is this the way that I want to live my life? Do I want to be working 5 days and miss out on some of those things with the kids, And the answer is no. I think that's where, yeah, as I said, you've got to start taking those small steps and those actions to changing it. We get one life, we get one life. And I think sometimes, yeah, those days and those months and those years can sometimes feel long, but gosh, it goes quickly, doesn't it? And so, I think we owe it to ourselves to just drop the good girl act, and start prioritizing ourselves. And it will feel uncomfortable, but we can all do it. I know we can. We're all capable of it, highly capable of it.
Yeah, definitely. I love that analogy of actually looking at your 90th birthday. And I've heard of also the analogy of writing your eulogy of what would you want to say, which is it's exactly the same concept.
Yes. So the audio is on my website if you want to go have a listen. It's I loved recording that. It's such a beautiful moment. How often do we look forward to look back? We don't often do that, and I also think we're in a Western society, where looking at aging and death and, what's to become of us, we don't tend to do that and talk about that.
No, we don't. We don't enough.
We don't enough. It's not, it isn't celebrated, and we haven't go down the rabbit hole of, youth and beauty and all of that. But there is such beauty in aging. And my goodness, my 97-year-old great uncle has just traveled to Korea to be honored for his, contribution to the Korean War. It's 75 years since that. Oh my gosh. Imagine traveling over to Korea at 97. Like what an honor, what a special
That's amazing.
moment. Isn't it just? I mean, if we reach that milestone, like how incredible, and I think that's what we should all be, all be considering. We don't all reach that age. We don't. And, I think being able to look forward in order to look back, yeah, it helps. It puts things into perspective, and it helps you.
And I think it's so powerful. Who do we are? How do we want to show up? And understand that difference. And I think it's really validating. Now, just quickly as well, Caitlin, in the book, you've got 12 archetypes of women. I know we don't have time to go through all 12.
I won't go through all 12. Yes.
But there are a couple that you think that you would like to call out that you think would be relevant for working mums.
Yeah, so these 12 archetypes, they were inspired by the research that I was doing into the good girl, but also they were informed by the survey that I conducted of over 100 women. And so I started to look through, well, what does the good girl look like for these women? And what are those common themes? And I think for mothers, I definitely see the saint. The saint is, attuned to everyone else's needs and emotions. She takes care of everyone else. She's the giver. She is the giver. And, that often leaves her little left for herself.
Yeah.
There's the lollipop lady. This is one of my favorite ones that I created. She is responsible for maintaining control and maintaining order. She's the one that makes sure that everyone gets to where they need to go. I'm sure, in the sense of a mother, she is, making sure that, everyone gets to school on time, the lunches are packed, and, the weekend hobbies are all, everyone's there on time to do their weekend activities. So, yeah, she's the controller, but the benefit of that is also that, she maintains control. And the control obviously is that safety element, right? But the problem with that is it leaves little to the imagination. It leaves little room for magic and for the unknown to occur. And that can often be scary, right? But I think I do see the lollipop lady show up, when it comes to motherhood. And I think the last one, is the fortress. And the fortress, again, she builds walls. And I think it's keeping people locked out and shutting down and not necessarily, expressing her true emotions. And maybe she's she's scared. Some women are scared that there's going to be like an avalanche, or, you know, once she opens up, she won't be able to stop, or she's going to be judged, or, you know, she needs to kind of maintain control because there's a lot going on, you know, like, let's focus on the kids, not worry about myself. And so, you know, she kind of, she builds those walls, but it's hard for people to then be able to reach her. So, you know, there are 12, there are a lot of them. But I think, you know, those three definitely show up when it comes to motherhood. And as I said, you know, these are obviously a reflection of the survey results. It's not everyone's experience, but I do think once you read through the 12, you know, typically you'll identify with one or a few.
Yeah, I think definitely with those couple that very identifiable, of the lollipop lady and the fortress and that you can certainly relate to. I even think about my son's lollipop lady, not allowed to cross the line until she's blown the whistle. And she's a very militant person, but it's like, as a mother, you're like, no, don't do this until you need to. And there's also a safety aspect. So I actually can highly relate.
I know. I love that one because it's also so visual. And I think, you know, I'm a visual like learner, and I was like, what's the woman that's like controlling? And then I just like the image of this, you know, lollipop lady came to mind. And I was like, oh my God, that's it. So yeah, I do love that one. I love it.
Amazing. Now, if you could rewrite the good girl narrative for future generations, particularly for young girls today, what would it be?
This is such a beautiful question. And truthfully, in the book, I didn't assign the other side of the good girl. And I didn't assign a term or a word or a description because everyone's journey is going to look different. I can't know what the other side of the good girl is for you. You know, as it is for me, it's going to look different. For some, it'll be, you know, the rebellious, the bad girl, like, great. But for others, it will be, you know, a sovereign woman, or it might be being true and being real, you know. And I think I encourage everyone that's going through this transition to not box yourself in with like another label, but to think about what it might be on the other side of being a good girl. What does it look like for you? And so for me, it's about being real. It's about being real and being in my body. There's a lot in here about, you know, a calm and regulated nervous system. And so for me, it's like being in tune with myself, my body, having a kind of, you know, a real experiencing life as it's happening. I think it's about being honest with myself, not believing my own bullshit, self-respecting, being, you know, respectful of myself and others always, but I often put others first. So how can I put myself either first or at least equally to that other person, you know, and then being connected to who I am and the things that I love and the way that my brain works. And, you know, it's all of those things. It's honoring all of the pieces of you and living in alignment with who you are and that truest essence and that truest sense of self, and to build, you know, a really rich life off the back of choosing yourself and learning all the things about yourself and overcoming that good girl. And so, you know, this journey will, as I said, look different for everyone. And I think that's the coolest part. You know, I never wanted to write a book that said, once you untangle from the good girl, this is what you need to be, because we have been told our whole lives to be certain things and to behave in certain ways. And I was like, it doesn't actually make sense for me to then go and tell women who they need to be now. Like, this is the fun part. You get to build your own identity. And I'm so excited to continue to see these, you know, to continue to hear these stories and see these transformations. And, you know, if you do have a word that helps you navigate this and a term and an identity, then, like, by all means, you know, stick with that and go with that. Share it with me. I would love to hear it. But yeah, you know, just honor that who you become beyond the good girl is going to be a surprise to you, just as it is to me. And that's exciting. I think that's really, really exciting.
Can I just say thank you for actually not being prescriptive about what you need to do next, to actually then really be truthful into yourself and actually recognizing that everyone has their own path. That so many times different people say this is what you need to do, but I think it is so powerful for you just now to say it's going to look different for everyone, because that gives everyone the permission slip to know that they can actually find their own unique way. So I just want to say thank you. It's just so humbling to hear that. And I have to say, just reassuring, because there's not one way. There's literally billions of different ways for each individual to rewrite this script. So I just want to say thank you. That was so beautifully said, to actually, that there's not one answer, but everyone has their own path.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And that actually took a lot of conviction, because I had a publisher who said, well, what is next for them? And I had to push back, and I didn't end up going with that publisher. No shade to them, but I just said, I cannot put a label on this. That is the antithesis of what I am standing for and trying to achieve here. And didn't end up going down that path. So thank you. I actually really appreciate, you're the first person to kind of really, really pick up and acknowledge that. And it's hard, because what are you selling then? At the end of the day. But for me, it just felt wrong to say this is where you need to go and this isn't here you need to be. And I think it's way more exciting that you get to build that yourself. So yeah,
I think it's exciting. It's one of those choose your own adventure books, but I think there's so much power in that.
Yeah.
Because everyone has different conditionings about what they've been told. They've had different upbringings, that everyone has their own unique story, that no doubt there are onion layers that they need to unravel. But as you so beautifully and powerfully said earlier, it's around the boundaries, the stories, and challenging it. Some people will accept some elements of being a good girl, others won't. But it's really being able to stand up to be your true self. Because as you say, we've only got one life. We might as well enjoy it in the way that we want to. And that's really probably the important part about how you want to show up. It's recognizing as well that there are social conditionings, patriarchal systems. Depends on how much you want to stay in that lane, or if you're like, nah, it doesn't feel right. This is your permission slip to get off at that exit ramp and explore something new.
That's exactly it. It's an invitation, and I really hope that that's how it's, received. And I hope that, that invitation is appealing enough to try to just give it a crack and see what else is out there for you, and what other ways that you can show up and play. And I think that's, as I said, that's exciting. It's a choose your own adventure. If you want to play, come on over. Like this is it. This is it. This is where things start to shift. And, I hope that when we all start to own who we are and start to shift ourselves, we will see the beautiful ripple effect and repercussions, around the world, and, and that kind of lifting and supporting of all women. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Caitlin. Just quickly, what do you do to fill your cup?
Oh, I like to, there's so many good things. I like to move my body, and whether that is, exercise or dancing or yoga or Pilates, any of that. I love saunas. So I love sauna, and I'm doing the sauna ice thing at the moment, which I love, ice bath. One thing that's filling up my cup right now, I'm going deep into the family history. I've always been a bit of a history buff, but I'm like tracing the family trees, my genealogy. Like I'm obsessed with that at the minute, and it fills me up and it relaxes me. So I'm doing a bit of that at the moment. And then obviously, spending time with family and friends. And I think that, it's simple. The things that fill us up are often so simple. It's not complicated. So yeah, they're a few of the things that I like to do to fill up my cup.
So now if people want to get a copy of your book and also connect with you, where can they check you out?
Yes. So my book, I like to say, is sold in all good bookstores, but it's also online. You can buy it on Amazon, Booktopia, Big W. You can also come and connect with me on Instagram. So at It's Caitlin Judd. And also I have a Substack. So my Substack is Good Juju by Kate Judd, or you can just search my name, Caitlin Judd. And my website's caitlinjudd.com. So please get in touch. I would love to hear what you have to think and, you know, grab a copy of the book and yeah, come over and converse. Because I mean, the best part is just hearing all of the stories and how, you know, women untangle from their good girls. So please come chat.
Well, thank you so much for this. Just, I have to say, probably the word that for me is this wholesome and just, I would say, uplifting chat. So thank you so much for today and best of luck with the book.
Thanks, Carina. It's been amazing. I really, really appreciate it.